had, of these 70 weeks, you had 7 weeks, and then you had 62 weeks, and then you had 1 week. So that would be 7, and when you say a week, each day would be like a year. So you're talking about 49 years, and then 600 and something years, and then 7 years. And that last 7 years was broken into halves, 3.5 years, and then another 3.5 years. And I don't want to get involved and go down this little trap and spend too much time. In the ancient world, especially in the Greek, pre-Greek, that whole part of the world, because of the Babylonians, they counted a year as 360 days. In mathematics, it's called the sexagesimal system, where we have a base 10 system. They had a base 60 system. They counted by 60s. And our year that we know is more accurate is just a tad over 365 days. All of that being said, if we convert from their calendar system to our calendar system, you are looking at about 476 years from the time of the announcement that the Jews could return to Jerusalem. You're looking at about 476 years. If you add that from that announcement, which it is known that announcement was made in about 444 to 445 BC, if you add those number of years, you wind up with 33 AD. Now, to muddle the waters a little bit more, that's based on a 365-day calendar, not a 365 and 1/4 day calendar. And so there is a great difference of opinion as to when Jesus was born. Now, me personally, I'm of the opinion that Jesus was born about 3 BC. And that's really strange to say Jesus was born 3 years before Jesus was born. But it's just a change in the calendar. That's all it is, just playing with the numbers. In which case, adding the 476 years would result in 30 AD, not 33. And 30 AD is about the time that Jesus was put to death. If you say that Jesus was born in 33 AD, if you were saying that Jesus was born in, there is no such thing as 0. There was no year 0. It went from 1 BC to 1 AD. If you were saying Jesus was born at that time, then he dies at 33 AD. Either way, okay, the Jews knew this. We played the pretend game last week, pretend that we were in a Jewish synagogue. They knew all of this. They knew the time was getting short. We said that there were people that rose up and claimed to be the Messiah. And some of them had great followings. Some of them tried rebelling against Rome. Didn't end well, Alan. Didn't end well at all. Rome had a really happy time going around killing people that didn't like Rome. And they took care of these false messiahs, and their followers, we said, just more or less kind of disappeared into the woodwork. Never to claim that their leader was the Messiah again. Anyway, that's the 32nd Whirlwind Tour. There's a little bit more information that I included on this handout sheet. So what I want to do is start really at the bottom of this first page, and I'm going to talk about Matthew. So here we are at New Antioch Church of Christ. Now I want to hear from you. And if you are listening to us streaming, think of Midway Church of Christ, or Moulton Church of Christ, or Hatton Church of Christ, or any congregation, just pick one. Tell me the things that are needed to be done in that congregation. Now I'm going to take the main one off the board, preaching and teaching. Okay? So you don't get to say that, preaching and teaching. What are things that have to get done?
Benevolence.
Benevolence. Keep on.
Outreach.
Outreach. Keep on.
Looking for opportunities to assist folks.
Okay.
Maintenance of the building.
Maintenance of the building. Tell me about maintenance of the building, Alan.
If you own a house, you know that from time to time, you've got to redo or replace parts of the house that are functional for your comfort and well-being, whether it's heat for the wintertime or cool for the summertime. But buildings take upkeep. It's just the way they are.
I couldn't get, y'all remember back the first really cold snap we had this winter, a few months ago? Our gas logs quit working.
Uh-oh.
And I'm going, oh. And Diane kept saying, what happens if we lose electricity? What happens if we lose electricity? Well, we're just going to be cold. But I got to looking at YouTube. I've never taken a gas heater apart before. But I got to looking at YouTube and them saying what is likely wrong. And there is a little, in one of the jets, there is a teeny tiny hole. Not much bigger than a needle can go in, but that's an air hole. And it has to have airflow through that hole for the gas jets to work. And it gets clogged up with dust. And they said all you have to do after you take this thing apart is get some spray air, compressed air, and just blow in that hole. Now Marcus is going, Marcus, I didn't know that. So, the hardest thing to do was take this heater apart and then remember what came off of what so you could put it back together. But I sprayed that little hole with air and put it back together and hit the button, poof, and there was the heat. Maintenance.
And weren't you proud of yourself?
Well, I was just glad I could get it back together. That's all and I was thinking the whole time of the story that Randy Moultrie told me about one of his grandchildren that took a carburetor apart on a tractor and laid all the pieces out, and Randy's looking at these pieces going, how do you put this thing back together?
It wasn't a grandchild, it was Caleb.
Oh, it was Caleb, okay. So that was what it was in my mind the whole time. I've got all these heater pieces, you know, in the floor down here. But anyway, so maintenance on the building, things that have to be done. What else has to be done?
Fellowship.
Fellowship. There's a list out on the table in the foyer about needs for the pantry. What do we do with the food?
Basically, we give it away to people that need it.
How?
Food baskets, food boxes.
Food boxes. Somebody's got to take those boxes.
Yeah.
But people have to be identified as well that need those boxes.
What else goes on in a congregation?
Visit the sick.
Visit?
Visit the sick.
Visit the sick. Lots of other things. Somebody's got to replace light bulbs when they go out. I guess that's maintenance. Somebody's got to clean.
Somebody probably got a mold.
Somebody's got to mow this time of year. The whole purpose that I'm saying this is, how many talents do we have in this auditorium tonight?
A lot.
A lot. Yeah. Alan built that streaming booth back there, and I've talked to him. We're probably going to have to configure it a little differently, and there's a shelf back there, and we're probably going to have to take off about 6.5 inches of that shelf. I'm going to let Alan do it. I think everybody can look at that booth back there and go, well, he's pretty skilled as a carpenter. Think of all the talents that we have in this auditorium, and none of them are the same. But we all have talents. And we all put them to use.
Hey,
And they all fit together. What does Paul say about the body?
Every
Neatly.
joint,
Neatly fit together.
yeah, knit together, each joint supplying what's needed.
So think about the disciples that Jesus called, and we know, and I've said this several times, if you're ever asked the question, how many disciples did Jesus have? The answer is, I don't know. But we know out of those disciples, he called 12 to be apostles.
we've got teachers, we've got thought leaders, we've got people capable of leading prayer.
What about Jesus?
I don't think you're gonna lead another, teach another, what was it, grade class you had that time?
What now?
What was the
Oh,
grade
that grade class, when the little girl, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
I saw the look.
Yeah.
All right,
4-year-olds?
here's the point I'm trying to make. Jesus called these apostles. Do you think they all had the same talents?
Not even
No.
close.
What do we know about some of their occupations?
Fisherman,
Okay.
doctor,
All right,
tax collector.
what would a fisherman, what kind of talents would a fisherman have if they're going to follow this rabbi around this arid country for 3 years?
Patient.
What kind of talents would a fisherman be able to lend to this group?
Put groceries on the table.
Okay?
Yeah, he would have some skills about relating to repairing a boat, a ship, maybe a house.
Understanding nature,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
being able to read the signs. What are some other occupations that we know of among Jesus's, the 12 that he called his apostles?
Yeah.
Tax collector.
Who was the tax collector?
And Matthew.
Matthew, and his name was also called Levi. Don't know whether he was actually from the tribe of Levi or whether that was just a name. Now, you understand that these 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the writers of these Gospels do not identify themselves. There is nowhere in the Gospel of Matthew that says, I, Matthew, the apostle, am writing this. You don't see that in Mark, you don't see that in John. So where do we get the fact that these people wrote these, what we sometimes call books?
Sometimes by style,
Stuff.
how they.
Well, if it's style, then, Alan, you would also have to have another example of their work to compare.
Well, if Matthew's a tax collector, he pretty much knows how to be, well, Randy can tell you what an accountant does. He has to keep orderly.
All right, don't go any further. Don't go any further, please. You're going to wipe out about 5 minutes of my lesson.
Oh, sorry.
Now, if you have a Bible where at the title it says the Gospel of Matthew or the Gospel according to Matthew or the Gospel according to Mark, where did this come from? And some versions, in the very first verse, it says the Gospel according to Matthew. But in the earliest Greek manuscripts that are in existence, those names do not appear. So, the Gospel according to Matthew, well, it was written, it was church tradition, I guess you would say, from the earliest 2nd century, which we're only talking about 50 years after Matthew would have written Matthew. The earliest church fathers said that the Apostle Matthew wrote this. Okay, the Apostle Mark wrote this. The Apostle John wrote this, where Mark wasn't an official apostle. So the earliest church fathers, by tradition and from what they knew, said that Matthew wrote this. Matthew is a tax collector. What does he bring to the table? All right, Alan, your own.
Well, just like I was referring to Randy. Randy started out as an accountant, and I
Gospels where the writers of the Gospels say that they're setting out to write an orderly account. Well, no, there's only one that says that. But there are two that you look at that give an orderly account specifically. One is Luke, who says he is going to give an orderly account, and one is Matthew by style. So, an accountant, a bookkeeper, a tax collector, what would you think if they're going to write something down? What do you think their style would be? Are they going to pay attention to detail?
You would think so.
Much. And Matthew pays a lot of attention to detail. Especially detail concerning lineage and detail according to prophecy of the Old Testament. In fact, Matthew, way more than the other gospel writers, referred to Old Testament prophecy. So, what I want you to do is I want you to think of this little band of apostles. Now, there's a lot more people than just them following Jesus around, but I want you to think of this little band of apostles, and they each have their own talents. Jesus did not call his apostles together looking for everybody to be the same. We in this auditorium are not the same. Yet, when we work together, we bring about the work of the congregation. When those apostles would work together with Christ, they brought about the work. When they went on what we sometimes call the limited commission, they brought about the work of Christ. Matthew wrote to the Jewish community. Mark, for the most part, wrote to the Roman community. Luke wrote to the Greek. And John had more of a world view, a wide view of his gospel account. There have been attempts to try to bring all of these four gospels together into one account, to try to merge them into some kind of chronological order. Maybe that's a good thing in some ways, but there is a problem with that. And there's a really big problem with that. And the real big problem with that is each of these gospels present Jesus in a little different light and a different purpose. Matthew is presenting Jesus as the Messiah, the coming one that has been prophesied, the one that has been predicted that would come to the Jews. Mark represents Jesus as more of a servant. John has an altogether different idea of well, not idea of Jesus, but a presentation of Jesus. What do you think John's presentation of Jesus was? The theme, what was it based on? Think of the think of the first chapter of John.
Proving who Jesus is.
Proving, not that necessarily he's the Messiah, but proving that he was a real, actual person that walked and talked and, felt hot, felt cold. Because by the time John was writing his gospel, there had arisen an idea that, well, this person of Jesus really wasn't a human. He was divine, but he really wasn't a human. And there was a reverse idea about that Jesus put away his divinity and he lived the life for 3 years of a human, and when he was put to death, he was only a human, and then he took back on his divinity when he rose. Both of these John is arguing against in his very first words when he says, I saw the man, I walked with the man, I heard the man, I touched the man, I know the man was real. So each of the gospel writers have a different purpose in how they present Jesus. And when we try to merge the gospels together, you kind of lose that. Like I said, there is maybe a purpose in trying to stagger everything in the exact chronological order, but you lose that sense of what each writer is saying about Jesus when you do that.
You also miss a huge learning opportunity for us as Christians, because as their style is different, we have an opportunity to learn more factual information, especially about Christ's teachings.
All right. How do we know about this information, Alan?
Well, if going back to Matthew, and I'm going to say Matthew versus John, but Matthew goes through, the birth of Jesus. John goes through right off of presenting the human deity
Yes.
that is dwelling among us. And then John goes practically right into the teachings of Jesus. By the time you get to the third chapter, you already got Nicodemus on the scene wondering what's going on.
Which has always, I'll tell you about a conversation, and I'm getting off script here, but I'll tell you about a conversation I had one time. This was a few years ago. I was helping our daughter, who was getting ready to move from Florence back to Florida, and she was having a yard sale. Now, I hate yard sales. I don't want any part of them. I don't want to help with yard sales. I don't want to see yard sales. I don't want to go shopping at yard sales. I've got more junk in my house I can deal with. I don't want to buy your junk. But I was asked, so I went over there. So we've got all this stuff set up in the front yard. And 2 black pants, white shirt missionaries came up. If you know what I'm talking about, you know the organization. I'm not bashing the organization when nobody is here to defend themselves. But I mentioned about the apostles had all died. Oh no, the apostles have not all died. So I'm standing there waiting for this, you're going to have to explain that to me. I kind of already knew what they were going to say. Oh no, the Apostle John is still alive. This guy's really old. Oh no, the Apostle John passes himself down from one president of this organization to the next president of this organization. So each president of this organization is an apostle, and he's the Apostle John incarnate. So I asked him a question. I said, was Jesus divine? No, Jesus was a human. Jesus was not divine. I said, well, the Apostle John changed his mind then, didn't he? And I started quoting John chapter 1. Well, they had to go to another house real quick to visit somebody else. You got John saying in John chapter 1, this is about Jesus, and now if John is past his katra down to somebody, now he's changed his mind that Jesus is no longer divine. Okay, I'm getting back on script now. So let me tell you something, and I labeled it on this handout sheet. It's kind of interesting, educated opinion. This is pure opinion, but I've read this from several scholars in more than one occasion. Back in that day and time, tax collectors developed a very quick method of what we would call shorthand. Now that's known. And why would Jesus ask Matthew, a tax collector, to be an apostle? What talent? Well, okay, you say that he is meticulous. He pays attention to detail. That's true. But several people have are of the opinion that Matthew acted as like the secretary to the group and wrote things down because he could do it very quickly using shorthand. And that the sermons that we find recorded in Matthew are the most likely to be word for word or as close to word for word as we can find. Because Matthew would have written those down. And if Matthew is meticulous and paying attention to detail, he probably keeps his notes. Even after Jesus has been put to death and risen from the dead, he's got his notes to refer back to when he is writing this gospel.
He also has help.
You
The
cannot.
Comforter with him.
You cannot absolutely, unequivocally prove that. But that is, like I said, a very educated opinion about Matthew and what we read in the book of Matthew. Matthew divides his gospel up into basically 6 parts, and we're going to just run through this quickly because we will look at these in more detail later on. These are not chronological. Now, the first thing that you have to understand is that Matthew is not in chronological order. Daniel was not in chronological order. Several books in the Old Testament were not necessarily in chronological order. The writers wrote and organized their work according to themes, not what happens in succession. If you want to probably have the best what happened in succession, look at Luke. I like Luke. Luke is my favorite gospel because Luke does that. But you've got to really love Matthew as well. Matthew provides just as much organization, more detail than Luke, but it's just not in chronological order. So you start off with the genealogies. That's true. The birth. That's basically Jesus' birth, the announcement of his birth, what little we know about his young years, getting started in ministry like that, first 4 chapters. And then he goes to what we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount or the Mount teachings, and then in Matthew chapter 10, starting in Matthew chapter 10, around that, are discourses that deal with how Jesus instructs his disciples, the marching orders. And then around Matthew chapter 13, Matthew changes and he puts together these parables, he puts together these teachings on the kingdom of God. And there's something a little different here that I've got to stop and say. Mark, Luke, and John typically use the phrase kingdom of God. Matthew, for the most part, uses kingdom of heaven. Is there a reason for that? There really is. And there's a reason for us as well. The Hebrews had such a idea of holiness about the name of God, they would not pronounce it. In fact, we don't know what that name is today. Because when they took the name of God, they took the vowels out. And you wind up with 4 little consonants that's oftentimes called the tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton in Greek. Yes. Yes.
In our language.
But you don't know what goes in there. You don't know what goes between the letters. And so a real cute German one time just decided to add some letters and vowels, and came up with Jehovah. Y in German is J, Jehovah. Okay? And that's because where the name of God should be, the Hebrews in their text, they would write above that another little group of letters that was supposed to be like, this is going to stand for the name of God. We're not going to say the name of God, but when you see this, think name of God. And so what the Germans did is they just took each of those vowels and dropped them in between Yahweh and came out with Jehovah. We don't know whether that was the name of God or not. There is nothing in the ancient Hebrew text that names the exact name of God because they were scared of even writing it down. It was so holy, they weren't even going to write it down. Okay? So, among the Jews, they would typically not say kingdom of God. They would say kingdom of heaven. And heaven, we understand as a place, the dwelling place of God. But heaven, among the Jews, became another name for God. Now, what can we get out of that? How many times have we seen the letters in a text, OMG? How many TV shows do we have people say, oh my? How many profane times have we heard, well, God? What can we learn from the Jews with Matthew and calling the kingdom of God the kingdom of heaven? Respect. Profound respect. And you see that in Matthew. Complete, profound respect for God, even to the name of God. And our time is over. We will pick up here next week. And one of the things that I want to do next week is I want to talk about what is called with Matthew prophetic formulas. There are several prophetic formulas in Matthew, and I want to start getting into Matthew reaching back to the Old Testament to show who Jesus was, not just the lineage, though there is something in there in that lineage that we don't always pick up on as well. And that is Jesus not only being a descendant of Abraham, but a descendant of David. And just what does that mean? That Jesus is a descendant of David. Yes, David was a king. That's right. But it's a different kind of king. And it's a different way of thinking about who Jesus is that Matthew is going to deal with. Thank you very much, and we'll be finished for tonight.